Well, thank you, Madam Toastmaster. Now, those of you who have known me for a long time have probably wondered, how did I get to where I am? And from what you know about me, you probably wonder if I had a macabre childhood. But I can assure you that it was anything but that. It was a rather boring childhood. And today, I'm going to take you through some early steps in my life which helped mold me into the weatherman, if you will, that I am today, although I'm retired, and I'm not sure I can legally claim that anymore. But it's been a long journey. When I was very young, I was very interested in winter weather. I grew up in the Northeast, and when I was 5 years old, I learned to ice skate, or more accurately, I learned to fall on my knees a lot trying to ice skate. But I was always interested in snow and seeing the snow outside and going sledding and making a snowman and a snow fort and making this big pile of snowball ammunition so I could fight the neighbors kids that were my age, who built these big snow forts and threw snowballs at each other. But the snow had to come from somewhere, and I started, even at a very young age, getting interested in weather. So when I was about 8 years old, we had a storm right after Thanksgiving. This is in New England, that to this day many meteorologists consider to be the storm of the century, and that would have been the 20th century, of course. And this particular storm was really macabre. It was a crazy storm. But in any event, this is the day after Thanksgiving, and not really realizing what was going on, I went outside. We had a sandbox, and the neighbor's kids and I were playing in the sandbox, and the wind started to pick up and blow the sand around, and it was getting cloudier and windier. And so I said to my friends, you know what, we ought to go in and have lunch and come back out later, because perhaps by then the wind will have died down and we'll be able to play in the sandbox. So went in, had lunch, came out later, and the wind is even stronger, to the point where the mothers are all bringing their kids inside. Then the power went out, and I can remember that evening in 100-mile-an-hour winds, my mother driving to a nearby location to pick up my father, who was working part-time for the Christmas holidays as a second job. And telephone poles were down, wires were down, and everything. But the point I'm making here is that I tried to make a forecast when I was 8 years old, and it was my first wrong weather forecast. So I continued through my early years being interested in weather, and I got to 20 below zero. I thought that was pretty cool, literally, and enjoyed the ice that it created. My father would hose the backyard down so we would have a skating rink when we had these cold spills. So I was very interested in weather, and when I got into middle school, I really became interested in it. By that time I lived in suburban Maryland, an area that I just finished visiting this past week. And I was very intrigued about the different changes in the weather and the way one level of clouds is going this way and another level of clouds is going that way. And so when I got to the 9th grade, in science class, I remember a day where we had a choice of what we were going to study next. And in that class were mostly boys and 5 girls. And so the teacher said, we're going to study another subject next, and we're going to vote on it. You have a choice which one you want. We're either going to talk about automobiles, or we're going to talk about weather. Now, who wants to talk about automobiles? Everybody's hands went up except me and a few others. How many wants to do weather? Up went the 5 girls and me. Well, professionally, that was the right decision. However, socially, it was not. So I was a marked person at that point, and I had to dig my way out of that hole for quite a while. So finally, I went on to 10th grade in a high school in Maryland. And a friend of mine and I both were interested in weather, and so we set up a weather group. We called ourselves the Montgomery Blair Weather Forecasters Association. Now, Montgomery Blair, at the time, was one of the best high schools in the country. In fact, it really still is, even though they've torn it down and built a whole new one in the same general location. And so every morning we would get together in the library before classes and put together a forecast for the day, which we probably copied out of the paper or heard on the radio or something. And they would read this over the PA system before classes began. And most of the time it was pretty innocuous. But in February of 1958, we had a very cold week. And my friend and I got together, and we put out this forecast for the coming weekend and said, we're going to have a blizzard. We are going to have over a foot of snow, and then it's going to get even colder after that. Well, my friends, I want you to tell you that was my first correct weather forecast. One of the great storms of the late 50s in the Washington, D.C. area had 17 inches of snow. My house got the whole next week of school off, or school days, or snow days, and I knew I was on my way. But where I was going to go from there, you're going to have to wait to find out until I do speech number 2, because at my age, I can't get everything in the icebreaker. Especially when you decide 2 hours before the meeting that, well, I'll go ahead and fill that speaking slot. So I hope you'll be back for the next time that I have a chance to fill a speaking slot, and we'll continue with this very interesting saga.
A madam that wants her own picture taken. I'm getting the people in costume. Well, thank you, Carl, for giving us an icebreaker. What a macabre situation. Someone who's been in Toastmasters for 50 years plus to do an icebreaker again. But it's an opportunity for every one of you who are advanced Toastmasters to think about. I went through that manual twice, about 7 years apart, and it was an entirely different experience. So I highly recommend it. The purpose of the speech was clearly for us to get to know Carl better and for him to speak before an audience and be prepared. And I want to thank him for preparing on such short notice. It was interesting. I watched people during the other speeches, and he paid attention well, but I think that was faking it a little gracefully, because he was obviously, as we all do, rehearsing our own speech in advance of, and it's hard to listen to others. I love that you brought in some concepts about your childhood. It was boring. You hinted that your father took a second job during the Christmas season. So I saw middle class to lower class, raised in the East Coast. I saw the weather. I did get to know parts of you I haven't known about before that I identify with. I also liked the fact that you logically, sequentially went from being a 5-year-old in kindergarten to the 5th grade to the 9th grade when you finally got choices. And you mentioned a year for almost all of them except for one. And I kind of needed the year and the time to focus on what did we see in the black and white little TVs of the news as compared to the color multi-graphic things that we've seen you do on KPSW. So a couple more years would have been better. As far as one other piece of confusion I had, you mentioned that there was a Weatherman program at the Mount Blair, Washington Academy that was the best school in the country, and I wasn't sure whether you went there or you just got the training from there. So I wanted that a little better. But overall, a full picture of your life's passion, as well as making us want to come more and more. The speech should have had a beginning, middle, and end, but your end was, I'm going to give you more soon. So thank you very much.